sorting through my late husband's old fishing tackle in the basement, I found a manila envelope taped to the underside of his wooden workbench. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. Underneath it, in smaller letters, for Lillian only. Please don't show our daughter. I stood there in the low light with the envelope in my hands and didn't move for a long time. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. I'm Sarah, and this is a story I've been sitting with for almost a year now. I wasn't sure I was ready to tell it, but I think I am. Please stay with me until the end, and when you're done, tell me what city you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. My husband Gerald and I were married for 38 years. We met in the spring of 1982 at a 4th of July planning committee meeting in Asheville, North Carolina, which sounds unremarkable until you know that neither of us had signed up for that committee. We had both walked into the wrong conference room at the community center and were too polite to leave immediately. By the time we figured out our mistake, Gerald had already made me laugh twice, and I had already decided he had kind eyes. We stayed for the whole meeting. We went for coffee afterward. 6 months later, we were engaged. Gerald was a civil engineer. He wore the same brand of work boots for 30 years and kept a level in his truck at all times because, as he said, you never know when something needs to be straight. He was not a man who talked about feelings easily. He showed them instead, through the way he remembered small things, the kind of decaf I liked, which back route home I preferred when I was tired, that I could not sleep if the bedroom door was fully closed. He was the quietest kind of good man, the kind you don't fully appreciate until the absence of him changes the sound of every room. We raised our daughter Connie in a brick house on Sycamore Ridge Road in Asheville. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch in the back, a garden I tried to maintain with varying success over the decades. Connie was our only child. We had wanted more, but it didn't happen, and after a time we stopped grieving that and simply poured everything into her. She was bright and funny and complicated the way children are when you've given them too much of yourself and not quite enough structure. She grew up well, mostly. She married a man named Ray when she was 29. Ray sold commercial real estate. He was not unkind, but he was always calculating something. Even in casual conversation, you could feel him running numbers behind his eyes. Gerald died on a Friday in October, cardiac arrest. He had been dealing with a heart condition for 2 years, and we knew it was serious. But somehow the end still arrived ahead of schedule. Connie was with me at the hospital. Ray was in Charlotte for a deal that almost certainly could have waited. I held Gerald's hand at the end. His grip loosened slowly, the way a tide goes out, and then he was gone, and the room was the same temperature it had always been, which struck me as strange. The weeks after were what they always are. Casseroles from neighbours. Phone calls I answered on autopilot, the particular exhaustion of grief that isn't dramatic, just heavy and constant, like carrying something you can't set down. I went through the house in stages. Some rooms I could manage, others I wasn't ready for. It was in November, 6 weeks after the funeral, that I finally made it to the basement. Gerald's domain, his workbench, his organised shelves of hardware, his fishing equipment, his tools hung on pegboard the way he liked them, each one outlined in marker so you could see what was missing at a glance. I was going through a plastic storage bin near the back wall when I noticed it, the edge of something pale and flat, taped to the underside of the workbench. I almost missed it. I only caught it because I was kneeling to reach the lower shelf and the angle was right. I peeled it off carefully. The tape had been applied neatly, pressed down at the corners the way Gerald did everything. The envelope was sealed. My name on the front in his block print. For Lillian only. Please don't show our daughter. I want to tell you that I was calm. I wasn't. I sat down on the basement floor right there, between the storage bins and the old fishing rods, and I held that envelope in both hands and felt something cold move through me. Not fear exactly, more like the sensation of the ground shifting just slightly underfoot, the feeling that the story I thought I was living was not quite the complete version. I should give you some context for why those words, "don't show our daughter," landed the way they did. In the weeks since Gerald had passed, Connie and Ray had already begun to hover. At first it seemed like concern. Connie called every day, which was more than she'd called in the previous 5 years combined. Ray sent emails with subject lines like "quick question about the estate and thinking of you," also wanted to ask. They offered to come help me sort through paperwork. They mentioned twice that they had a friend who was a financial planner and that he'd be happy to take a look at things. No charge, just to make sure I understood my situation. I had told myself it was grief doing strange things to everyone, that Connie was worried about me, that Ray was being practical in the only language he knew. I had given them the benefit of the doubt, the way I always had, because Connie was my daughter, and because there is a particular kind of hope a mother carries for her children that is very slow to let go. But now I was holding an envelope my husband had deliberately hidden from our only child. That changes the accounting. I didn't open it in the basement. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to, the same one that makes you step back from a door before you know what's on the other side. I went upstairs. I locked the back door. I sat at the kitchen table in the good lamplight and opened the envelope with a letter opener slowly. Inside was a folded note, handwritten. Beneath it, a small brass key, and beneath that a business card for a man named Arthur Beam at First Southern Bank, with an address on Merrifield Road and a handwritten note in Gerald's printing, "Safe deposit box. He is expecting you. Go alone." I read the note first. It was 3 paragraphs, short and careful the way Gerald was short and careful. He called me Lily in it. He only ever called me Lily when he was being completely serious. "Lily, there are things I should have explained to you while I had time. I was afraid of what the explanation would require us to face together, and so I kept waiting for the right moment. That was my mistake. What is in this box is yours, all of it, entirely. Please speak to Arthur before anyone else. He will walk you through everything. Please do not mention this to Connie before you understand what you are dealing with. I love you. I have loved you since the wrong conference room. I am sorry that loving you means leaving you with this. I tried to make it as easy as I could. I sat at that table for a long time. The furnace hummed. Outside, a neighbour's dog barked once and went quiet. I read the note again. I was afraid of what the explanation would require us to face together. What had Gerald been afraid to tell me? What had he spent years not saying? I thought about Connie, our daughter who called every day now but had called infrequently for years, who had asked me at Thanksgiving 3 years ago casually whether Gerald had given any thought to estate planning, who had mentioned once over dinner that Ray's firm had handled some complex family financial situations and that if we ever needed that kind of help, it would be easy to arrange. I'd thought she was being thoughtful. I had thanked her. Gerald had changed the subject. I didn't sleep that night. I made coffee at 5 in the morning and sat with it in the kitchen until it went cold. I ran through everything I thought I knew about our finances. The joint checking account, the modest retirement savings, Gerald's pension from the engineering firm where he'd spent 22 years before going independent, the house which was paid off, the life insurance policy I had already filed. It had all seemed orderly, straightforward. Nothing had seemed tawdry, straightforward. Nothing had seemed hidden. But there was a key on my kitchen table. By the time the light changed in the windows, I had made 2 decisions. The first was that I would go to First Southern Bank that morning, alone, and ask for Arthur Beam exactly as Gerald had instructed. I would not tell Connie or Ray. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was walking into. The second decision was that I would contact my own attorney, a woman named Frances Okafor, who had an office on Lexington Avenue, who had handled Gerald's and my wills 15 years ago, and who I had not spoken to since. I trusted Frances because she was direct without being unkind, because she had never once talked down to me, and because she was not connected to anyone in Connie and Ray's orbit. Those last 2 qualifications had never mattered to me before. They mattered now. I drove to First Southern Bank on Merrifield Road at 9 in the morning, when the doors opened. The building was modest, the kind of regional bank that had been in the same location for 40 years, with low ceilings and a lobby that smelled of carpet cleaner and old paper. I told the young woman at the front desk that I was looking for Arthur Beam. I watched her expression register something, a small recognition, the way people look when they've been briefed to expect a specific name. Arthur Beam was perhaps 65, with a full grey beard and the measured manner of someone who dealt in other people's private matters and understood the weight of them. He shook my hand with both of his. He led me back to a small private office. He closed the door and sat across from me, and he said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm glad you came. Gerald told me you would. He said you might need some time first. He told me about you," I said. "He came in regularly. Once a year, sometimes more. We would talk for a while." He folded his hands on the desk. "He was a careful man. He said you were the careful one too. He said that was why he trusted you with this." The safe deposit box was larger than I expected. Arthur Beam led me to the vault room and left me alone with it. I sat at the small table and opened the lid and had to breathe carefully for a moment before I could look properly. There were 4 items inside. The first was a handwritten ledger, spiral-bound in Gerald's engineering block print. It documented a series of financial decisions beginning in 2006. I recognized some of the terms from years of overhearing Gerald talk about his work. Index funds, a small commercial property in Knoxville, Tennessee, that I had never heard of, a brokerage account in both our names, statements routed to a post office box I had never seen. The final total, updated 6 months before Gerald died, was written at the bottom of the last page in plain numbers. $391,000. I read it twice. I set it down. I picked it up and read it again. The second item was a manila folder with the deed to the Knoxville property, a small commercial unit, a strip of rental space generating quiet, steady income that had been deposited into that separate account for 12 years. The third item was a printed summary from the brokerage house showing the account value, the account holders, and a note in Gerald's handwriting along the margin for Lily, not for distribution. The fourth item was a letter, sealed, longer than the one I'd found in the basement. I won't share all of it. Parts of it are too personal, and they belong to me alone. But the substance of it was this. Gerald had begun setting this aside in 2006, 3 years after Connie married Ray. He wrote that he had watched something change in those 3 years, that Ray had begun asking questions about Gerald's retirement plans, about the house, about whether Gerald had considered putting assets into a family trust. Gerald wrote that at first he had taken it as interest, even helpfulness. But over time, the questions had a direction to them. They were oriented toward access, toward positioning. And Connie, whom Gerald loved without qualification, had begun to speak in Ray's language. She had begun to frame conversations about family finances the way Ray framed them, as logistics, as planning, as something to be organized in advance. Gerald wrote that he had not built this in secrecy to deceive me. He had built it in secrecy to protect it. He had kept it invisible, not from me, but through me, trusting that after his death, with documentation and legal standing, I would be able to hold it without interference. He had watched Ray closely for years and had come to believe that if the full scope of their savings were visible, it would not stay safe. That Ray would find a way to reframe it as a family resource. That Connie, who had spent 20 years being shaped by someone who understood money as power, would let him. He wrote, "I know this will be hard to read. I know you have always chosen to see the best in her. I have too. But a man who spends 30 years as an engineer learns that the structure of a thing matters." I looked at the structure of what Ray was building, and I was afraid. I wanted you to be able to stand on solid ground when the time came. I put the letter face down on the table and looked at the ceiling of the vault room for a while. Then I took photographs of every document with my phone, placed everything back exactly as I found it, closed the lid, and brought it to Arthur Beam. I asked him to note formally in the bank's records that I was the sole authorized party and to flag any inquiry from any other individual. He nodded in a way that suggested he had been expecting this request. I drove home on the interstate with the radio off and both hands on the wheel. Connie called that evening. Her tone was easy, practiced, the warmth of someone who has learned to deploy warmth strategically. She asked how I was settling in, whether I'd made any progress on the paperwork, whether I'd thought more about the financial planner Ray had mentioned. She said his name was Stuart, and that he had helped 3 other families she knew navigate these transitions. She said the word transition like it was something to be managed rather than something to be grieved. I said I was taking my time. I kept my voice light. I was already composing a message to Francis Okafor while Connie talked. Francis had a small office on Lexington above a print shop that smelled like coffee and old case files and the particular order of a woman who ran her practice exactly as she intended to. She was 61, sharp, with reading glasses she wore on her head when she wasn't using them, and a habit of letting silence do its work before she spoke. She was the right person for this. I laid everything out on her desk. The photographs, the ledger, the deed. Gerald's letters. I watched her read without interrupting. She asked 2 questions when she finished. Then she sat back and was quiet for a moment. Gerald was smart, she said finally. He set this up cleanly. The account is legally yours. The property transfers under the will without ambiguity. He made sure of that. She tapped the photograph of the brokerage summary. What you're describing with your daughter and her husband isn't a legal threat yet, but it will become one quickly if you're not ahead of it. We spent 2 hours together. By the end, I had a plan. Francis would file for formal probate on all assets, including the previously undisclosed ones, with complete documentation. Everything transferred solely and cleanly into my name. The Knoxville property would be independently appraised, the investment accounts consolidated under my direction with a financial advisor Francis trusted, and critically we would create an unambiguous legal record that I had acted with independent counsel, that no outside party had been involved in my decisions, that every step had been taken correctly and transparently. That last part was the shield. Over the following 3 weeks, I executed each step quietly and without announcement. I met with the financial advisor, a calm and precise woman named Claudette Harris, who reviewed every account and explained everything to me in plain language. I signed documents at Francis's office. I had the Knoxville property assessed. I did all of this while continuing to answer Connie's calls warmly and saying nothing of substance. It was Ray who noticed first. He called on a Tuesday afternoon, and his voice was different. The easy friendliness was replaced by something clipped and direct. He said he had spoken to someone at First Southern, someone who had mentioned that I had visited the bank and met with the branch manager. He said he didn't want to make this awkward, but that he and Connie felt they had a right to be involved in any significant financial decisions. He said the phrase, family interest, twice in the same minute. I told him I was working with legal counsel and that everything was being handled through proper channels. I told him the probate filing would be public record and that his attorney was welcome to review it. I was polite. I was not movable. 20 minutes later, Connie called. Her voice had a quality I recognized from when she was a teenager and felt cornered. A kind of tightness around the edges of her words. She said I was being secretive. She said Dad would have wanted her involved. She said she had a right to know what her father had left behind. I'm still here, Connie, I said quietly, and so is your father's will, which names me as sole beneficiary. You're welcome to verify that. A pause. Then her voice dropped into a register I had not heard before. Flat. Deliberate. We know there's more than what was filed, Mum. Ray has been looking into things. If you're not going to be reasonable about this, we're going to have to question whether Dad was in the right state of mind when he made these arrangements. Mental incapacity. My daughter was telling me she would challenge her father's estate by arguing he had not been competent. I kept my voice even. I told her that Patricia Okafor's number, I corrected myself, Francis Okafor's number, was publicly listed and that any communication going forward should go through her. Then I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. I will not pretend I wasn't frightened. There is a specific kind of fear that comes from being threatened by your own child. It is not like other fear. It moves differently. It sits in a part of you that was built specifically for love, and so when it arrives it has nowhere to go. I cried, not briefly. But when I was done crying, something was still there underneath it. Something Gerald had known about me before I knew it about myself. A steadiness, the ability to hold still when things got loud. I picked up the phone and called Francis. They said they'll challenge on incapacity, I told her. I know, she said. Let them. I've been expecting it. I gave myself 4 days. I drove to my sister Marguerite's house in Greenville, South Carolina. I walked her neighborhood in the mornings. I slept more than I had in weeks. I ate her cooking and let myself be just a sister for a few days, not a widow navigating something that required me to be careful at all times. When I came back, I was ready. The flowers arrived 2 days after I returned. A large arrangement, lilies and white snapdragons, the expensive kind you order specially. The card read, "Mum, we love you. We're sorry, we've been under so much stress. Can we please start fresh? Connie and Ray." I set them on the counter and looked at them for a while. They were beautiful. I understood that was the point. Ray called the following evening. His voice was reconstructed into warmth. He said they had been under enormous pressure, that grief affected people in unexpected ways, that he and Connie regretted the things that had been said. He said there must be a way to resolve this that was good for everyone, that surely Gerald would have wanted his family at peace, that they weren't trying to take anything, they just wanted to be included, to feel like they were part of the conversation. Part of the conversation. I understood the shape of what he was describing. Not conversation. Negotiation. I thanked him for calling. I said I needed more time. I kept my voice warm and gave him nothing to grip. When I hung up, I felt something settle in me. Not anger. Not even triumph. The quiet, clear-eyed calm as someone who has stopped hoping the situation will become simpler and has accepted that she is the one who will see it through. I threw the flowers away. I didn't need them in my house. That week, I called people I had been putting off calling. My friend Barbara Linwood, who had been checking on me since October, and who I had been gently deflecting. My neighbour Helen, who had known Gerald since the 90s, and who I knew could hold things in confidence. My pastor, Reverend McIntosh, not for any particular counsel, just for the company of someone whose intentions I understood completely, and I called my granddaughter, Jess, Connie and Ray's daughter. 26 years old, living in Nashville, working at a recording studio. She had sent me a text 3 weeks earlier that had stayed with me, Grandma. I'm not sure what's happening, but something feels wrong. I'm here if you need me. Don't let anyone pressure you. I had not called her because I didn't want to put her in the middle, but her text had told me something important. Whatever was being planned in that household, it was not unanimous. Jess picked up immediately. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She was careful in the way young people are when they're trying to be honest without being disloyal. She told me there'd been a lot of conversations in her parents' house about what Grandpa had left behind. She said she had been uncomfortable with the way those conversations sounded. She said her father had been making calls and that she didn't know who to, but that she had overheard things that worried her. She said she was glad I was working with my own lawyer. I didn't ask her to take sides. I asked her to stay in my life. She said she wasn't going anywhere. From Francis, the picture stayed relatively quiet on the legal front. Connie and Ray had not yet filed anything. I used the time carefully. I reviewed every financial document Claudette had organized. I updated my own will with Francis to reflect the full estate and to include a separate bequest for Jess, independent of her parents. I made arrangements for the Knoxville property to be managed professionally. I closed every gap. They came on a Saturday morning in early December, 3 weeks after the flowers. I saw Ray's car from the upstairs window and felt something tighten in my chest. Then I reminded myself, you have done the work. You know what you are dealing with. I went downstairs. I put the kettle on. I opened the front door. Connie was holding a bakery box. Pecan rolls from a place on Maryview Street that I had always loved. She was dressed carefully, just casually enough to suggest she hadn't tried. She looked tired, or something that was meant to look like tired. Ray stood half a step behind her, with an expression of practiced contrition. I let them in. I served coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. Connie spoke first. She was good at this. She had learned it somewhere, possibly from watching Ray, possibly from a version of herself she had grown into, over 20 years of being his partner. She talked about loss, about family, about how these situations brought out the worst in everyone, and how she regretted that. She talked about Gerald warmly, genuinely, I think, because whatever else was true about Connie, she had loved her father. She told a story about him teaching her to parallel park in an empty church parking lot on Sunday mornings, that I knew was real because I remembered it, and then by degrees so gradual they might have been invisible to someone who wasn't paying attention. The conversation moved. She mentioned a mediator, someone who helped families work through complicated transitions. She said the word attorneys with the slight recoil of someone who has been coached to make legal counsel sound adversarial. She said Gerald surely would have wanted harmony, that there must be enough to go around, that surely there was a version of this where no one had to lose. Enough to go around. There it was, the thing the flowers had been a down payment on. I noticed she did not ask me once how I was doing. 40 minutes at my kitchen table. She never asked. Ray leaned forward when Connie finished. His voice was lower. He said he wasn't trying to take anything from me. He said he just wanted to feel connected to what Gerald had built. He said the word legacy twice. His voice had a constructed quality, like something read from a script, but underneath it, something that might have been genuine anxiety. About money, probably. About the future. People like Ray always had a fear beneath the strategy, and sometimes the fear was real even when the behavior was not. I let them both finish. I didn't hurry them. I let every word settle. Then I folded my hands on the table. I love you, Connie, I said. And I meant it. I looked at her steadily. Nothing that has happened changes that. But I'm not going to discuss the estate outside of legal channels. That's not because I'm hostile. It's because your father asked me to handle things carefully, and I intend to do that. Ray's expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker. Quickly controlled. Mum. Connie's voice had changed. The warmth dropped out of it like a weight falling. If you won't work with us, we'll file the incapacity challenge. Do you know what that looks like? A woman your age, managing assets on her own, refusing to include her own family. I understand, I said. Francis Okafor has prepared our response. I'd encourage you to speak with your own attorney before you decide how to proceed. Ray said they had documentation, notes from the last year of Gerald's life, people who had observed him and who had concerns. His voice was precise and controlled in the way of someone reading from a prepared position. I had been afraid of this moment. I had practiced being afraid of it for weeks. But sitting there in my kitchen at the table where Gerald and I had eaten 1,000 ordinary dinners, something happened that I had not predicted. The fear didn't disappear, but it became very small, and under it was something solid and quiet that did not move at all. Then file, I said. They left. Ray picked up Connie's coat and handed it to her with the efficiency of two people who have rehearsed an exit. Connie paused at the front door. She turned and looked at me, and for a moment her face was just her face, without the strategy in it. My daughter's face, the one I had known since she was 3 days old. Something moved through her expression that I couldn't name. Then she turned and walked out. I stood at the kitchen window and watched Ray's car back out of the driveway. My heart was going fast. I won't pretend otherwise. But I picked up the phone and called Francis. The incapacity challenge was filed on a Monday morning in January. Frances called me before I'd finished my coffee, and she sounded the way she always sounded. Unruffled. Precise. Faintly satisfied. The petition alleged that Gerald had experienced cognitive decline in his final years, and that the undisclosed assets had been accumulated and arranged under conditions of diminished capacity. They were asking for redistribution under intestate succession, which would result in roughly half the estate going to Connie. Our response was comprehensive. Gerald's medical records from the final 3 years of his life, showing no evidence of cognitive impairment in evaluations conducted by his cardiologist and his internist, a signed letter from Arthur Beam at First Southern Bank attesting that he had met with Gerald consistently over more than a decade and had observed no confusion, no disorganization, no signs of diminished capacity. The ledger from the safe deposit box itself, with entries dated as recently as 5 months before Gerald's death, organised with the precision of an engineer who had been paying close and careful attention for a very long time. Frances also introduced something I'd not known about until the week before the hearing. Ray had made a mistake. In his early communications with the consultant he had hired, someone who described himself as a financial forensic specialist, but who had, Frances discovered, a history of being brought in by families contesting estates. Ray had sent a series of emails laying out his strategy. Those emails had been forwarded, apparently inadvertently, through a chain of professional contacts that eventually reached Frances's network. She told me they were legally obtained, and that was all I needed to know. What they contained was Ray's own words, written before any gesture of reconciliation, describing the undisclosed assets as leverage in the negotiation, describing the plan to approach me with a mediator as a way to get her talking before she's fully protected, and in one email referring to me in a phrase I will not repeat in full, but which amounted to calling me someone who would not know how to fight back. I read those emails in Frances's office and said nothing for a moment. Then I thought about the pecan rolls, about Connie's carefully chosen casualness, about Ray's practiced remorse at my kitchen table, all of it written down, all of it now part of a court record that did not care what justifications had been built around it. I set the pages down. I did not cry. There was a particular quality to that moment, a specific sound, like a lock engaging. The final confirmation of something I had suspected for a long time, but had been too hopeful to name. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in February. I dressed carefully. A grey blazer. Dark slacks, the small pearl earrings Gerald had given me for our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a composed woman of 67 who knew what she was doing and had the documentation to prove it. The courtroom was small and businesslike. Probate hearings usually are. No gallery, just the judge, the attorneys, a court reporter, and the principals. Ray and Connie were already seated when I arrived, their attorney between them like a seam. Ray did not look at me. Connie did. Something passed through her expression when our eyes met. I held it for a moment, then took my seat. Frances presented our case with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times and saw no reason to perform. She walked the judge through the medical records methodically, through Arthur Beam's letter, through the ledger, date by date. She noted the internal impossibility of the incapacity claim given the quality and continuity of the documentation. She was calm. She was thorough. She was completely convincing in the way that truth is convincing when it is properly assembled. Then she introduced Ray's emails. The moment opposing counsel saw them, he asked for a recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I watched something happen across the aisle. Ray sat very still. Connie was speaking to their attorney in a low, rapid voice, her hand moving. There was a quality to Ray's stillness that I recognized, not calm. Emptied, the look of someone inside whom something has just gone silent. When the hearing resumed, their attorney requested a continuance to review newly submitted materials. The judge denied it in a way that left no room for discussion. Connie took the stand briefly. Frances cross-examined her about specific incidents she had described as evidence of her father's confusion. She asked Connie to be specific, to provide dates. Connie could not because she had fabricated everything. I believe she genuinely remembered her father being tired, being slower toward the end, being less himself than he had once been. That Ray had built a legal architecture on what were, in truth, the ordinary diminishments of a sick man's final year. Under questioning, that architecture collapsed back down to its actual size. At one point, Connie said quietly, "I just felt like he wasn't the same at the end." Frances said, "During your father's illness, did you share concerns about his cognitive state with any of his physicians?" A pause. "No." "With his cardiologist, his internist, any medical professional?" "No." "Did you express these concerns to your mother at any time during his illness?" A longer pause. Connie's jaw moved slightly. I knew that look. I had known it since she was 8 years old, and trying to decide whether to tell the truth about something. "No," she said. "So your concerns about your father's mental capacity arose after his death?" It was not a question. "Yes," Connie said. "Thank you," Frances said. Nothing further. The judge ruled that afternoon. The petition was denied in full. Gerald's estate remained exactly as filed, wholly in my name, exactly as he had arranged. The judge noted in his brief remarks that the evidence of Gerald Caldwell's competence was consistent and well documented, and that the petition had been inadequately supported by credible evidence, particularly given, and here he paused just slightly, the timing and circumstances of its filing. That phrase, the timing and circumstances, was a small and precise cut. I watched Gray receive it. He didn't react visibly. He was too practiced for that. But something in him had shifted. Frances shook my hand in the corridor, firm and brief. I thanked her. Then I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat and exhaled. A long, slow exhale that felt like something I had been holding for months. Outside, the February afternoon was cold and ordinary. A parking attendant in a yellow vest, 2 pigeons on a concrete wall. The world going about its business, indifferent to verdicts. I drove home. The consequences came in pieces, quieter than the events that had preceded them. Ray had made the mistake of putting things in writing in an industry where professional reputation was currency. The emails, now part of the public court record, found their way into the right conversations. Ray worked in commercial real estate. Commercial real estate was a smaller world than it appeared. By late spring, 2 clients had quietly moved their business elsewhere. A partnership he had been pursuing for 2 years did not materialize. Whether this was cause and effect or coincidence, I had no way to know. I heard about it from Marguerite, who heard it from someone who knew someone. I received the information with the same sadness I had come to associate with everything related to Ray. I had never wanted him humiliated. I had wanted only what Gerald had left me. That those 2 things turned out to be connected was his doing. Connie called me 6 weeks after the hearing. It was the most difficult call of everything that had happened, including the calls in which she had threatened me. She was not performing. Her voice was just her voice, stripped of the fluency Ray had added to it over the years. She sounded like my daughter, the actual one, the one from before all of this. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't fully understood what she had been part of. She said she had let someone else do her thinking, and that she knew saying so didn't undo anything, but that she needed me to know she understood it now. She said she had been thinking about her father, about who he actually was, apart from what Ray had told her his father's money should mean. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush her. I let her say everything she needed to say. When she was finished, she asked, "Are we okay?" I recognized the smallness of the question, the nakedness of it. It sounded like my daughter at 15, at 7, at 4 years old. The daughter who was afraid she'd gone too far. "We're not okay yet," I said, "but I haven't given up on us." "Do you understand the difference?" A long pause. "Yes," she said, Then give it time. And Connie, please go talk to someone. Not a mediator, a real therapist, someone who will tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. She said she would. I believed her, or I wanted to. That was hers to carry now, not mine. Jess came for Easter. She drove from Nashville with a ham she had cooked herself and a bottle of good wine, and the particular quality of attention that young people rarely offer their grandparents. We cooked together, we talked, and she told me carefully, without editorializing, that her parents had separated. I listened without commenting. I felt the weight of it, the sadness of watching choices accumulate into consequences, but I did not feel triumphant. I had never wanted any of this. I had wanted to live out my years in the house where Gerald and I had built something together, with my daughter in my life, with my granddaughter close. Some of that was still possible. Some of it was not. The financial matters settled cleanly and without drama. Claudette managed the account consolidation smoothly. The Knoxville property was generating reliable rental income by summer. Every document was filed and confirmed. Francis sent me a final bill and a brief handwritten note that said, "Gerald was right about you." I framed it and put it in the study, next to the window that looked out over the backyard and the garden I was slowly bringing back to life. I went back to First Southern one final time and closed the safe deposit box. I brought the ledger home and put it in the top drawer of Gerald's old desk. I didn't need to refer to it again, but I liked knowing it was there. 38 years of partnership, and then 11 years of something he had carried alone, quietly, trusting me to know what to do with it. He had been right. I had known. Eventually, by the time autumn came around, I was beginning to recognize my life again. Not the life I'd had with Gerald, which was irreplaceable, but the life that was left to me, which was still, I discovered, quite a lot. I took a weekend trip to Charleston with Marguerite. I started a quilting group that met Thursday mornings at the community center. I had the kitchen repainted in the warm yellow Gerald had once pointed to in a magazine and then thought better of suggesting. He would have liked it. Jess came for Thanksgiving. We cooked together again. She told me she was applying to graduate programs. I told her I was proud of her. We didn't talk about her parents much, but before she left, she stood in the doorway in her coat and said, "Grandma, I just want you to know that I think Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing." I told her I knew. I told her I thought about that most days. I want to say something plainly because I think it matters. Gerald kept a secret from me for 11 years. That was not ideal. It was not the way I would have wanted us to handle things. And there are days I feel a sadness about those years, about the conversations we didn't have, about whatever he carried alone that we could have carried together. I don't think secrets between spouses are ever fully without cost, but I also know this. Gerald looked at our situation with clear eyes and made the best decision he knew how to make with the information and the courage he had at the time. He trusted me with the truth when it mattered most, and when the moment came, I was able to honor what he had built. Trust is not the absence of complicated things. It is choosing to believe in someone's intentions even when their methods weren't perfect. Gerald believed in mine. And grief is not a state of weakness. Anyone who has looked at a widow and calculated that her loss makes her manageable has made a serious error in their understanding of what loss actually does to a person. It does not hollow you out. It clarifies you. It removes everything that isn't essential and leaves you with exactly what you are made of. I am made of 38 years with a man who brought deviled eggs to the wrong committee meeting and never raised his voice. I am made of his careful handwriting and his level in the truck and the way he changed the subject when he needed to protect something. I am made of what he trusted me to be. If this story found something in you, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've been in a situation where someone mistook your grief for surrender. Share this with someone who might need to hear it tonight. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in any grand philosophical sense, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're sitting alone in a house that used to hold 2 people and now holds 1, and you have enough time to trace the line between what someone chose and what eventually found them. Ray made a series of choices. He chose to see a grieving widow and calculate what she could be talked out of. He chose to write those calculations down in emails, in plain language, without apparently considering that words put into the world have a way of staying there. He chose to build a strategy around the assumption that I would not know how to fight back. Every one of those choices had a consequence. None of the consequences were imposed on him by anyone else. They came directly from what he had done, at the speed that these things travel in a mid-sized city where people in the same industry talk to each other. I did not orchestrate any of it. I didn't need to. The architecture of what he built collapsed under its own weight when the emails became public record. That is not luck. That is just how things tend to go when someone constructs something dishonest and then puts it in writing. Connie's choices were different, and her consequences were different too. She didn't lose a career. She lost something harder to name, the version of herself she might have been if she had stayed closer to who she actually was. I watched my daughter spend 20 years being slowly reshaped by someone who understood money as a tool and people as variables in an equation. I don't entirely blame her for that. It is genuinely difficult to hold on to yourself inside a marriage to someone as strategic as Ray, but at some point a person has to choose what voice they're going to listen to. Connie chose Ray's voice for a long time. The cost of that wasn't paid in a courtroom. It was paid in the look on her face when she stood in my doorway and asked if we were okay, and I had to tell her we weren't yet. That was the consequence that mattered, not the legal outcome, the human one. And Gerald. Gerald made choices too. He chose to carry something alone for 11 years rather than bring me into it, and I won't pretend that didn't cost anything. There are mornings I still feel a quiet sadness about that, about the conversations we didn't have, about whatever weight he carried that we could have shared. A marriage works best when two people carry things together. He knew that. I think he also knew he had a blind spot where Connie was concerned, the same one I had, the one that all parents carry for their children. He worked around it the only way he knew how. He made a plan. He documented everything. He trusted me to handle what he couldn't protect while he was alive. That was not a perfect choice. It was a loving one made carefully by a man who was doing the best he could with the courage he had. What I keep coming back to is this. Integrity is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. Gerald never made speeches about what he was doing or why. He just kept a ledger, year after year, in a bank vault on Merrifield Road, and trusted that the truth would hold if it was built carefully enough, and it did. That is what intelligence in service of principle looks like. Not cleverness for its own sake, not strategy for the sake of winning, just the patient, steady work of someone who knows what is right and keeps building toward it anyway, even when no one is watching, even when it is hard, even when it requires a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. I think about that when things get difficult now. I think about Gerald at his workbench, or driving to First Southern once a year, quietly maintaining something he believed in. I think about what it means to act well, not because someone will see it, but because it is the right thing to do. That is the only kind of character that holds up when it is actually tested, and it will be tested. That much I know for certain now. We are all, in the end, building something with the choices we make. The question is what we are building and whether it will hold.